Hi there, I'm Renee Shepard, and I am the owner, operator of the King's Medieval Fair in Glenpool, Oklahoma, November 6th, 7th, and 8th. This year, I'm so excited to announce that we have our very first ever beer garden. It's sponsored by the Dead Armadillo Brewery in Tulsa. They are coming to set up not one but two stations, and their beer is absolutely fabulous. I hope that if you are a beer drinker, an ale drinker, please come to the fair and have one. It'll be awesome. I am very much into herbalism and apothecary. Denise Marlar was a brewer in a little suburb of London now. She died in 1401, and she left the vast majority of her estate to a woman named Rose. My persona is Rosa, Georgette, Rosa being Hungarian for Rose. Denise Marlar, when she died, she left a will, and in it she left half a tenement building. She left sums of money. She left 80 pounds of white wool. She left all of these different pots and pans and things, and the benefit of one brewing to her daughter. Now, in all of this will, no man was mentioned. Not a husband, brother, son, cousin, uncle, no man. 1401. Who were the police in 1401? Who was a constabulary? She could pick up a phone and say, hey, somebody's breaking into my house. This is a very wealthy woman. She left a lot of stuff to a lot of different monastery and church, and this woman Rose was her major beneficiary. They all received these very wealthy things. So if you're a wealthy woman and you don't have male counterparts, who defended you? I can tell you that when I pick up that book that talks about women brewing from 1300 to 1600, I can tell you who defended her. She did. She did, and her servant Rose did. And they fought. And they fought with swords, and they fought with bucklers, and they fought for their lives. They fought for their livelihoods. They took care of business, and they weren't afraid to do it. The whole thing about Denise Marlar and her servant Rose, one of the things that I did, because I wanted to know just exactly how hard was this. So I went and bought a 50-pound bag of barley from the local feed store. It's the same barley you would make ale with from anywhere else, right? They just happen to use it for feed. So I brought it home and I sprouted it. This is called the malting process. You sprout it until the little proteins inside are converted to sugar, which is what you're looking for to make alcohol, right? 1/2 of the bag, 25 pounds, right? By the time I was done, every surface in my kitchen had a container of sprouted barley in it. It was everywhere. I don't put paper towel in the bottom of it because those roots grow right into that paper towel and you lose all of that. So just put it in a container, soak it with water, 7 to 10 days, voila. So if you're going to do ale, and you're going to make enough ale for your family and to sell that to a gallon a day, to realize how much barley had to be sprouted at a time, and they had to have enough for every single day of the week because the water was just poison. So when she said that she gave her servant Rose half a tenement building, it took the whole building to do this, because they had grain in different stages of malting, from grain that was just wet all the way to the sprouted grain. They had 7 days because they were brewing every single day. So at the 7th day, they then had to take this grain that was sprouted and they had to put it in an oven and toast it. Okay, in the Middle Ages, they did not have natural gas. So they were using wood or charcoal because they did not have coal. Remember, coal is a modern industrial age object because you have to go deep to get it. They made charcoal out of the woods, which is why a lot of forests have just disappeared, because we've used them to make charcoal, to heat things, cook things, do stuff with. So they took this charcoal, they heated up an oven, they toasted this malted barley. So now you've got, crunchy barley that you want to make ale out of. Now you have to flake this stuff because the whole grain will not release the sugar. You have to break the grain apart, but in such a manner that you're not making flour. So you have to flake the grain. I'm telling you, this is a crap ton of work. You have to flake the grain by putting it through some kind of a grinder. Now you have malted barley. This is the same malt that you make malted milkshakes with, or malted meat, malto meal. Same stuff, okay, all the way around. Anytime you use the word malt, it's barley probably that's been sprouted and then toasted and then flaked. These women did this every freaking day of their lives. And then they took it and added it to a mash tun where they poured not boiling water, but hot, because if you did, you made barley soup. You had to put the water over it in such a manner that it steeped like tea to steep that sugar out of that barley and into the fluid that you could now add your barm from your past brewings to, that barm being the yeast that was in the air naturally. They would add it to it and they would leave it set for 7 to 10 days. That's right, folks. They drank ale that was 7 to 10 days old. There was none of this putting it in an oak cask for a year. There was none of this, you know, it had molasses in it for 6 months prior to, no. These people drank raw ale, okay? But there was a purpose for it. All of the water, you have to remember, all of the water sources were poisoned. They did not have chlorine. They didn't have water treatment. They boiled the water and they made ale out of it so that people would not die of some horrible, hideous disease. And these women were productive, beneficial parts of their community. Now, there were 3 brewings off of this grain. The very first one would have the most sugar, so it would create the strongest alcohol. They fed that to the men. Because men, okay? After 5,000 years of brewing, we women knew that women don't need as much alcohol. So they would take, and then once they got that first pour through the grain, that got sent off to be made into ale for men. The second one was made for women and servants. Okay? We for whatever reason, we just don't need as much alcohol, but we still need clean water. And then they would do a third one for children. Least alcohol content, still potable to drink. Okay, 5,000 years of this, these women knew what the heck they were doing. Well, men occasionally would get second draw or even third draw ale, and they did not appreciate this. And so they made rules and laws about the Pure Beer Acts. There were bunches of them all over Germany and northern France, because Italy, they had lots of grapes, so they did wine. The Norsemen, they had honey, so they made mead. All the same basic premise. You have sugar, you have water, you have yeast, you got alcohol. And so they made these Pure Beer Acts. They also put things in it like gruit, G-R-U-I-T. It was a spiced bag that you could throw in it that would change the flavor up a little bit, make it a little bit seasonal, like we have seasonal craft beers today. But they outlawed all of that. It all depended on what was being taxed the highest and what was being sold the most and how it was transported. And then they discovered hops. They discovered that if they put hops into the beer, or the ale, to make beer, that the beer would travel further, would last longer, and so they could make it more commercially viable. And so the monasteries where the monks lived, like the Templars and all of these people, they decided that, well, if we can make it here and sell it in the Holy Land or wherever, then that's what we're going to do. And that's what they did. Basically, women went from making ale and beer and that kind of thing to making glass beads. This is something most people don't know. That's another thing that I happen to do, is I'm a lamp worker. I blow glass beads. Blowing glass beads dates back to the Egyptian time. They made little figurines and did all this kind of stuff. Then you fast forward to the Romans, brought ceramics and pottery, that kind of thing, into London, into England. And so the very first beads that the Vikings did, they did by crushing ceramic tiles brought in by the Romans and melting those back down and turning those into trade beads. And then as they got better, they started using silica and colorants that they discovered in their own processes. It was very hard glass, 90 COE. Those furnaces had to be really, really hot to do those things. It was great. But they're made exactly the same way as you get to the 1500s and you have the Venetians in Murano making glass beads. How? They take a mandrel, it's coated in some kind of a slip, they take the glass, they melt it, and they drop it over the mandrel, and they manipulate it by color, by size, by shape, and all of these different things, and you have a bead. It's exactly the same way the Vikings did it. And lots of historians will tell you that the art and habit of making beads on a mandrel over heat died out between the 1066 end of the Viking period and the 1400 era when the Murano Italians were doing this. It's not possible. You can't just have an entire craft go and disappear and then re-emerge 300 years later as a full-blown industry, because in the 1500s they were the Italians and the French, they were ordering glass beads to the tune of millions of pounds, and the people who were making them were the same women that used to make the beer, because now they weren't allowed to make the beer. Between 1450 and 1550 we went from 30% of the ale making population being women to less than 1%. So what did those women do? Some of them learned how to do glass beads, and they made them as trade goods and used them in Africa and in Asia during the Spice Trail, going all the way over into China. 1400s, you had Marco Polo. Those people, they were using glass beads made by these women to make stuff, to do stuff, to trade. The beads in Manhattan were probably made by women in the glass bead making business. So anyway, that's my soapbox about women's work in the 1500s.